Welcome and thank you all for joining us for this video accompaniment to the BALLE 101 Toolkit, which is BALLE's compilation of resources for localists looking to catalyze local economy action in their communities. The full toolkit is located at the BALLE website, www.bealocalist.org, and has a comprehensive collection of materials and resources to help you start and advance your work. Local business alliances are the local economy ecosystem model that this video will be exploring, and we are fortunate to have Hanna, the founder and co-director of the Seattle Good Business Network and a senior BALLE fellow, as our moderator for this conversation. Christine, take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for listening in and learning about this topic. We appreciate your interest in it. I'm going to introduce my two co-panelists. We have with us Derek Long, who is the Executive Director of Sustainable Connections in Bellingham, Washington. And we also have Elissa Hillary, Executive Director of Local First West Michigan. And before the overall flow of this is going to be that we each are going to share a little bit about how what our organizations are currently doing, the overall structure and size and staff and so forth. And then we're going to go into how we started these organizations and what those first few years were like as we were building them up and developing relationships and really building a community asset to advance local economies in our place. Before we do that, I just want to go over what are we talking about here, this idea of a local business alliance. In general, they are organized networks of locally owned businesses and their allies, which can include residents, municipal organizations, and so forth. But they all share a common interest in building a vibrant, sustainable local economy and community, with the idea that economy is really in service to community. So these organizations, they usually provide these values-aligned local businesses with a variety of services that might include education and training, definitely networking, marketing, connections to financing, and other critical resources. And in addition, they do work that drives market demand for local businesses through community education, different kinds of awareness campaigns, and on-the-ground events that really activate commerce and community. So really connecting residents with those businesses around this idea of, hey, we're all in this together. Many of them also have business-to-business programs that are connecting businesses through different kinds of collaborative efforts, local sourcing, group purchasing, policy advocacy, and other collective efforts that lead to sustainability. Many alliances are membership-based, and they typically have either a 501c3 or a 501c6 status, or both, and we'll get into a little bit about that. Okay, so first we're going to go into organizational overviews. I will start. My organization is Seattle Good Business Network. We were co-founded in 2010. I was a co-founder, and so we're about a 5-year-old organization. Andrew, you could go ahead and advance to the next slide. So we're co-founded in 2010. We're still a relatively small organization. We have 2 full-time employees, that's myself and my co-director, Aaron Nelson, and 3 part-time employees that are essentially program managers. Our 2015 budget is right around $350,000. And our purpose in our space is to connect and inspire people to buy, produce, and invest locally. So when we got started in 2010, what we did is we pulled together a steering committee of about, I think there were probably 15 local business owners, people that we recognize as being leaders in the community for their efforts around sustainability and so forth. And interestingly, the effort at that time, my inspiration for building this network was around sustainability. And it was meant to be sort of a sustainable business organization. So this is in 2010, and it became very clear that at that point in time, given the very peak of the recession, that really what people needed was focus on promoting local businesses. And so we launched a Think Local campaign. Andrew, you can advance to the next slide. And we ran that campaign for about 3 years. It was a photo campaign that featured local independent businesses with these signs that they created. As you can see, we had about 250 businesses participate. It was meant to be both a public education campaign about why local matters, but also direct promotion for these individual businesses. So we developed a handful of media partnerships we started with a local weekly, and then that expanded to a couple of monthly magazines and other partners. We ended up doing over 100 full-page features of these businesses, photos, and then we had lots of in-store materials and events and so forth. So that was kind of our campaign out of the gate. That we still do a little bit of work around that, but that program is somewhat dormant. Andrew, you can advance to the next slide. We also operate a program called Dine Around Seattle. This is a program that we actually acquired a couple of years ago. It had been going on for about almost 10 years, and the people who had been running it were done, and the number of the restaurants came to us and said, would you please take this on? And so we did. And we work with about between 50 and 60 local independent restaurants every March and November. It's a month-long promotion that encourages people to go out and eat at local independent restaurants. And we focus on those restaurants that have a commitment to local sourcing. We are doing more and more with these businesses to work on increasing that commitment to local sourcing and making it easier for them to do so. And then our other major program, you can advance to the next slide, Andrew, is called Seattle Made, and this is a program that supports local producers and manufacturers that are operating in the city of Seattle. So makers of everything from food and wine to metal parts and biodiesel. It really runs the full gamut. We have about 300 participating businesses, and we support them with a unifying brand, a variety of promotional opportunities, but also help with kind of the sort of operation side of things, access to capital, access to space, access to helping find new employees. And so that kind of runs the gamut of the work that we're doing right now. And I think at this point, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Derek Long. We'll go next, I think. Is that right? Oh,
I think that's slide.
We'll do that later. Yeah, we'll do that later. Derek, take it away.
Great. My name is Derek Long. I'm one of the co-founders of Sustainable Connections in Bellingham, Washington. We started with a volunteer steering committee and market research in late 2001. We did our first event in 2002, so we're about 14 years old. The organization right now has about, Andrew, if you could push the next slide. We'll go into startup, I think, in the next topic, but I'll give you an overview of kind of what we are now. We've got 5 program areas you can see on the slide: sustainable business development, think local first, green building, smart growth, food and farming, and energy efficiency and renewables. I think a lot of those program areas kind of speak for themselves, but the sustainable business development includes all kinds of sustainable practices that a business might take on, from everything from doing the measure what matters, quick impact assessment, to getting B Corp certified, to a program that's very popular, Towards Zero Waste. We have about 450 businesses who've done the Towards Zero Waste program. So there are 5 program areas. I could spend a little more time on that. But I think for the purpose for now, that's enough of an overview. The organization has 15 FTEs. We have a budget of about $1.2 million in 2016. We have membership base, businesses who are paying membership or partnership dues each year of about 430 or 440. But we actually work with about 2,000 businesses a year. Many of our programs, you don't have to be a member in order to participate. I think those are some of the main overviews that are topics I wanted to go with. Maybe at the next topic or next question, we can cover some of the startup materials, and we can go back to slide number 10, Andrew, then. But if it's all right with you guys, we can pass it on to where we are now with Western Michigan with Elissa.
Elissa?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Andrew, could you advance to the next slide, please? So my name is Elissa Hillary. I'm the director of Local First. Our organization was founded back in 2003. We were one of the first BALLE networks. At this time, we're working with over 850 locally owned businesses all throughout West Michigan, which is about a 10-county area. Andrew, can you move to the next? We run a series of programs, including a Local First campaign throughout the year, and this has elements of a directory. We've done a coupon book over the years. We have a website that we've had 40,000 unique visitors to each year, and then these photos are actually of a seasonal campaign about supporting your local treasures and discovering them during the holiday season. Next slide, please. In addition, we host a series of community celebrations throughout the year to bring people together to talk about the importance of supporting local business. So we do street parties and other outdoor events. Next slide. We have a whole array of programming related to food and farming, working with CSA farmers as well as other family-owned and sustainable farms in our community, local restaurants, grocers, and lots of community programming to drive the demand for local food and then to help build connections between producers. Next slide, please. We've also partnered with the city of Grand Rapids to create a recycling program that's reducing waste in our community and encouraging individuals to support local businesses. Next slide. And we do a whole array of programming related to sustainable business practices and monthly workshops for businesses to get together, share insight, and better their business practices. That also includes helping businesses engage in the B Corp certification process and in measuring their impact through the Measure What Matters campaign. Next slide. At this point, we have 7 full-time employees and 3 part-time. Our budget in 2014 was $750,000, and this is the breakdown of that. Next slide. I think that's it for me, actually.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so you can get a sense of the variety of programming that happens with organizations that have been at this for some time, but we didn't all start out with what we've got right now. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about sort of the startup phase and answering a few questions each. And I guess I'll go first. So the questions we're going to cover are how and why did we establish the organization, what legal entity did we form, and what were sort of the core activities as we got started, and then how did we fund and staff the formation and early programming of the organization. So I was a co-founder of the organization, and while I was, this is in 2005 up to 2010, I was working with another nonprofit here in the Seattle area that's sort of a sustainability research center, and I had become aware of sustainable connections in Bellingham and the BALLE idea about the role of the local economy in advancing sustainability, and became very interested in that work. And so when I got to a good transition point, I founded the organization, and as I said, the initial focus of it was around building an organization that was focused on sustainable business, so businesses are really committed to sustainability. But my timing was such that businesses were essentially saying back to me, back to those of us who were interested in building this, hey, we love the idea of sustainability, and we want to do what we can, but really right now in 2010, our focus is on keeping our doors open. And so we shifted gears a little bit and focused on this sort of first thing out of the gate, local campaign. The other thing that became very clear was, especially in the Seattle area, there are many, many organizations out there that are working with local businesses. We have, I don't know, 25 or 30 commercial business districts. Each of them has a merchants association or a local neighborhood chamber. We have sort of specialty organizations, et cetera. And so while people were interested in the idea of this, they really needed to see something of value right up front. And so we built the membership dues into the program fee to participate in the Think Local campaign, and we were very clear about the specifics that you get by participating in the Think Local campaign. And then we sold the heck out of it. We did everything we can to reach out to as many businesses as possible. It was a very sort of grassroots guerrilla type operation, but we were successful in getting about 150 sort of founding members by early to mid 2011. We formed as a Washington State nonprofit organization, and we were fiscally sponsored by another 501c that had been sponsoring a similar organization that had been kind of holding the space for a Valley-type network in Seattle for some time. So we sort of folded them into our organization and became fiscally sponsored by another party. Again, the core activities were around this Think Local campaign, and we relied on, well, me, in terms of staffing, and I would say that I had a background that was I was somewhat of a generalist. I have an MBA, but I had been in startups, I had been in nonprofits, I had done everything from kind of, managing director stuff to website development to marketing, and so I was able to cover a lot of the bases that were needed in order to get this thing off the ground. And then we had a lot of support from volunteers, and a handful of businesses that were participating were very engaged and interested in helping advance this. But I would say that I was really the major workhorse in getting it off the ground and doing what I could to sort of create a network feel about the overall work. So I'll stop there and pass it off to Derek about how you guys got started.
Thanks, Christine. Andrew, could you go to slide number 10, please? And yeah, how we got started. Really, a basis for an idea. Michelle Long and I had moved into the Bellingham area, met some what I would consider to be really inspirational local business owners, and had this idea of a support network to help business owners achieve their hopes and dreams for their business. And you might describe it today, we describe it today in people, planet, profit terms. And so we had enough conversations with great local business owners who were innovating in many ways to start to form a steering committee to explore the idea of a support network for businesses to be more successful. And that steering committee ended up turning into our board of directors. As I mentioned before, it was 2001 when we were researching other national models, talking to dozens and dozens of business owners and other community leaders. So it really came out of the interest of those steering committee members and the market research we did in talking to business owners and the interest of the founders, Michelle and I, and that the concept came together. There was a gap in our community. Nobody was providing these kinds of services, and so we felt confident going forward. We formed a 501c3, did as much research as we can on what the right format was. I think the mission and the outcomes we produce are beneficial to a broad sector of the community, and so we're a 501c3. I wanted to share that there is a resource available on our website. Our website's just sconnect.org, and in the About Us section, you can go to a drop-down and select our 10-year report, and in it is a timeline, and there's just a caption of it here on slide number 10 that you can see that sort of identifies what major new initiatives we launched in various years, and this goes from 2002 to 2008, but you'll see it all the way through 2012 if you download that PDF, and so that's a nice resource. I might get into some of the whys, why we started certain initiatives when and how they grew later in the webinar. Our core activities are a lot of speaker events with inspiring ideas, a lot of business-to-business mentoring where people have figured something out and they want to share it with other businesses, and that's sharing best practices around local sourcing, around reducing waste and energy, all kinds of good practices, how to attract and retain the best talent for their business. So there's a lot of business-to-business mentoring. And let's see, I think that's pretty good for the core activities. A lot of times we describe it as We do a lot of marketing and promotion as well. We describe it as market expansion, professional development, or business education, some policy work, but not a lot of policy work. So those are the core activities. Most of our policy work is done at a very local level with city government and Whatcom County government, with chiming in occasionally on state issues, very rarely on federal issues. And how did we fund and staff the formation in the early programming? It was really, like Christine said, you need a volunteer workforce. In this case, it was largely Michelle and I, and we were fortunate enough to attract a few people who had the capacity to volunteer quite a lot, who ended up being our first paid staff members in late 2002 and 2003. So a lot of volunteer effort. Our steering committee, which were local business owners, provide a lot of effort as well to help us get going. The funding, you know, we just scrapped it together with some early membership dues, some sponsorships for programs that had a growing audience that businesses wanted to reach. We were able to find one local or regional foundation to help us with an early grant, a small contract with the Department of Ecology at the Washington state level. And so it was a nice mix, and I'll go into the financial mix a little bit more detail, I think, later on. Or is it now? I wonder if we go to...
It's
yeah,
later.
Let's go to, what's that?
Let's have Elissa go ahead and do her startup
and then we'll cover budget. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So our organization, Local First, was founded in 2003 by a gentleman named Guy Vazani. Guy is a green builder and developer here in the greater Grand Rapids area, and he's a member of Social Venture Network. And he came back from a Social Venture Network meeting where two other organizations where two other business leaders were talking about these Local First campaigns that were just starting to butt up in their communities. And he came back and organized a group of business owners who launched one here in West Michigan. It started with 5 businesses that all came together, and their purpose initially was to talk to the community about supporting local business and how that builds a sustainable local economy, but then also to help businesses share best practices. In the beginning, they only wanted businesses that identified as sustainable businesses to be part of the network. And in 2003 in Grand Rapids, that was a real problem. There weren't a lot of businesses that they felt like could be part of that group or identified with those specific terms. And so the group kind of stagnated for a couple of years. In about 2005, 2006, that founding board decided, okay, we're going to change our philosophy. We're going to start to meet people where they're at. And so they started signing up local businesses, whether they were sustainable businesses or not, locally owned businesses, to be part of this organization called Local First. I was hired in 2007 as the first full-time staff person, and at that point we had just about 100 businesses that we were working with. Over the last 9 years, we've grown quite significantly. Most of our membership has grown through word of mouth between businesses in the business community, and also through some talented recruitment staff and lots of other volunteers that have become part of our team over the years. But a lot of it's really been word of mouth between business owners. Our budget in the early days was very, very small, and so as we grew, we had to be really scrappy and creative, and we'll talk more about that. We are both a 501c3 organization and a 501c6. A C3 is a charitable organization, and a C6 is a business membership organization. And when we had originally formed, we wanted to be a C3, but the IRS was not sure that you could use business as a force for good in the way that we were talking about at that time, and so they encouraged us to receive both designations. We've since found that very helpful. We actually have a board that governs each, but to our community, we're just known as one brand, Local First, and internally we manage all that different between our educational foundation and our business membership side. And I'd be happy to share more information about that. But basically, having that dual designation allows us the freedom to receive charitable grants and donations and do good community work, but then also to do a little bit of lobbying and advocacy on behalf of local businesses and to do some direct advertising for local businesses in a way that I don't think we could if we were just one of those two designations. I'll wait for Well, I guess I'll share before we move into budget that each of our programs we added slowly and strategically, in part based on what the demand was in our community or where we could drive the demand in our community, and then eventually find funding and create opportunity. But especially a lot of our early programs, we had to figure out how to self-fund. So we started with a lot of things like events, or very early on we had a street party that took place. Our first street party was back in 2005, I believe. And for a very long time, we make the money from the beer sales at that street party, and for a very long time, that was a significant part of our budget. So we've been scrappy all along, and we've grown into quite a sizable organization that way.
That's great. Thank you, Elissa. So this is a good segue into how we go from being a very startup organization with essentially kind of one, a big idea, but maybe one or two core activities that we're hosting that's funded in this very kind of grassroots, scrappy way. And I don't think I mentioned with the Think Local campaign that we did, it was similar to what Derek had mentioned, where we were charging basically a program fee, and then we also had a handful of sponsors. And that's how we paid for things like the materials and the website development and so forth, and a little bit of my time, but a lot of volunteer effort there. So in terms of the evolution and growth, Derek, can you talk a little bit about how you went about adding programs and balancing revenue and expenses, and kind of what that looked like as you were bringing on?
Sure. Andrew, could you go to slide 10, please? It's a nice segue from Elissa's comments. We might have a notion, being entrepreneurial and seeing gaps and opportunities in our community, we might have a notion about what kind of program might be successful here, but the best way to test it is through an event or two or three, a publication or two or three. And if it resonates in your community and in your marketplace, then you can, look for inspiration for things to round out a program from other communities or from, advisors in your community and so on. So, and on slide number 10, you can see kind of the timeline here where, for example, we knew there were 4 or 5 builders in our community that had, and a couple of architects that had a green reputation, a small part of the marketplace. But we felt like that residents here would love greener homes and greener commercial buildings. So why not do a home tour as a starting program? Get 8 or 10 homes on a tour, open it up for the weekend, and let the public show their interest in this kind of construction and landscaping. And so in 2003, we did the first home and landscape tour, and now we have a green building program with extensive programming, great partnerships with the American Institute of Architects, the Living Futures Institute, the U.S. Green Building Council, and designing and building green is very mainstream in our community now. But yeah, we would do an event or a publication, see how the economics work out on it, and add from there, constantly looking for new wrinkles to add that might add value, and then of course in parallel looking for new funding sources to have the potential for covering our costs for things that we're hoping to add. Andrew, maybe I'll go to slide 11, and this is a little snapshot. Also on our website, you can download the 2014 annual report, And this just gives you a snapshot of our budget. In our tenure report that I referenced earlier, you can see a bar chart that looks at the mix of the funding mix from several sources for the first 10 years of our organization. Things have been relatively stable in our organization over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of the mix of funding and percentages of funding, but this is just a quick slide on 2014 that shows you where the percentages went. About $1 million in 2014. In 2015, we're going to be at about $1 million again, and 2016 about 1.2. You can see the public and private contracts are a big chunk of that, and we'll talk more about fundraising strategies later in the call. But that slide gives you a sense of the mix. Yeah, I think I'm good for that question.
Okay. I'll just chime in a little bit on this idea about adding programs. When we first came out with the Think Local campaign, it was pretty clear that's what the businesses wanted us to do, and so it felt pretty good to go ahead and try to package something up that was with the intention of, and putting a fairly big goal out there, like we're going to get 150 founding members and you want to be one of them, and here's your deadline, and these are all the benefits associated with that. But it is a bit of a risky move because if you don't meet the goal, then you lose credibility. And so I definitely recommend that as you're considering new programs over time, really looking at what's that sort of minimum viable product that will allow you to kind of test the waters and figure out if there's interest, start to draw in partners and potential funders and so forth, and figure out really where those openings are to expand the work. And as we have grown and matured as an organization, we have done that more and more, where we say, okay, we're going to start with something, we're going to sort of test the waters and then go from there, rather than taking on something that is ultimately fairly risky. And while it's successful, really puts you on the map, if not, it can be a setback both internally and also externally. In terms of balancing that revenue and expense, again, I totally agree with Derek. It really is about starting small, but everything that you do, be thinking about how do we make sure that whatever we're doing in a way that's building credibility, because ultimately, at least in our, I think probably in any community in Seattle, our experience has been that there's a lot going on, and if you want to continue to play and continue to expand the good work and the vision that you have, you really have to be building credibility all along. And it's not easy as a small, often, and especially the early years, under-resourced organization. So take on what you can and do it well. Elissa, is there anything you want to add to that first question there?
Yeah, I would really encourage people as they're starting to form an organization and think about funding sources and thinking about adding programs, to think not so much like I think a traditional nonprofit thinks, but to think a little bit more like a social enterprise. Because I'll say, at least for our organization, this last year was the first year that we had city, state, and federal funding. But that took us over 10 years to get, and those grants and contracts come and go as the political climate changes. The same thing happens with funding from foundations. So the more you can build out earned income sources, the stronger your organization will be. And if those are unrestricted, you can leverage those. So as an example, in our organization, we consider membership dues unrestricted income. And over the years, we've used those certainly to finance our Local First campaign, but then also to start to drive the demand for things that our community didn't even know that they needed yet, like more local food programming. And then once we could prove that there was a demand there for that, we could get a grant that could help start funding that work, or we could establish more events or programs. But I would really try to think like a business owner and try to think like you're building this base. And then you can continue, and once you've got the base built with some unrestricted income, as much as you can get, then you can start adding programs on top of that that have more restricted funding sources.
a great comment. When you guys were adding these programs, when you didn't really have, when they were, starting small, you didn't really have a lot of money, how were you staffing them initially, getting the actual work done, and then how is that, and then as the program grows, how do you continue to staff them?
Yeah, well, I mean, especially in the early days, I would say I would call myself a generalist, and we have lots of generalists on our early staff, and then as programs would become more formalized, we would maybe hire someone with more specific expertise in that area. So for example, we've been doing sustainable business education and peer-to-peer sharing for about 8 years now, but we've not had someone on our team who specializes in that. We've had people who've learned that over the years, and that's just been an added on into their job description, or part of their time has been carved out for that. Just this last year, we added someone who specifically focused on those kinds of things. That's just one example, but I think that's one of the best ways to continue to grow. We've also tapped into interns and part-time workers. Over time, we've had a lot of luck with finding really highly qualified part-time people who are willing to help us and provide some expertise in various areas.
Derek, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say our experience is very similar. I think all of us are generalists, and that's so important in the founding stage, being willing and able to do a lot of different things, not as well as a specialist might, but good enough. And so that was definitely true for us. And, in the early days, to inspire and help move along early adopters, people that are already really motivated to produce, to be a better environmental business, a business that's more focused on sourcing local. They're already motivated, so you give them a little inspiration and an idea, and they go and do it themselves. We've been going in our community for 14 years now. And the needs have changed. If we want to deepen the change in our community and reach broader audiences, we have to provide more direct technical assistance. And so if you go to our website and look at our staff now, you'll find, there are people that are specialists in green design and construction, engineers on our energy team, people who have owned or currently own a restaurant that run the food and farming program, or were past farmers. So people with lots of great industry contacts and lots of specialist knowledge. And a lot of the change is happening by getting, not by doing inspirational events so much anymore, but by sending people with great knowledge into the business in a one-on-one setting to help guide people along. So yeah, generalist to specialist. That's how we've developed.
So now we're going to move a little bit into the revenue model and how that has changed as the organization has matured. Elissa, can you talk a little bit about that and what funding strategies have worked best and what's been challenging for you guys as you've grown in terms of finding different revenue streams?
Sure. Well, I'll just start out and say that from the very beginning, it was difficult for us to tap into most of what I would consider normal philanthropic funding streams. Because we were working with businesses, a lot of foundations were confused about why they would need to support us. Individuals were confused about why they would want to donate. And so those are things that have come later into our life cycle as an organization. That's part of why I was suggesting earlier to think a little bit like a business as you're working with businesses, and to tap into the expertise of the entrepreneurs that you're working with and your board as you're doing that. So in the very beginning, we actually did have a very small startup grant from an area foundation. It was a family foundation from a successful business. And then that was our first grant for about 4 years. So we had that grant, and then with that, we hired a part-time person, my predecessor. She did a little bit of work, left for something else, and I came on board. And once we started to build out this mix of business membership dues, which are now just about 1/4 of our budget, but in those first years, they were a very large percentage of our budget. And then we also started to host a street party in the summertime. And the first year we did that, we had 500 people come out. This last year we had 15,000 people come out. And that's an opportunity for us to showcase local businesses and talk about local food and beer and music and celebrate our community. But it also makes the money to cover one staff person in our office at this point. And it's unrestricted income. So we've grown that event over the years. And we also have over 30 businesses sponsor that. So then we started to look at, well, what else could we do that's a similar model? And we started a local food event that's kind of a taste of our community, and it started to build relationships. We built elements into that to build relationships between farmers and restaurateurs and chefs who weren't connecting with each other, and to start to drive the demand for local. And we also made money from that. So as we were adding programs, we really looked at where can we accomplish our mission, where can we drive the demand for this type of thing, this type of change that we want to have happen, and also where can we make money on that. And we prioritized those, and we honestly in the first few years didn't do things where we couldn't make money because we needed to build. And then over time we started to secure other contracts. We partnered with the City of Grand Rapids to create the recycling program that I mentioned and signed a 5-year contract with them. And that really was a big turning point for us as an organization because it stabilized us in a different way. We knew we had this income that would be coming in over 5 years, and so we were able to hire a whole nother staff person and to develop that programming and add more capacity, and then continued to seek grant funding and other sources over time.
That's great. It's interesting to listen to how things have developed in different areas and the starting point in terms of the evolution of the kind of local first movement. I imagine that people who are starting today might have different experiences even in similar communities than we had. I know that for Seattle Good Business Network, when we first got started, as I said, there are many other small business organizations around the Seattle area focused geographically or on sort of niche things. Nobody really focused on sustainable business, and nobody really thinking about this idea of a network or kind of the local first concept in general. Is really committed to that. But one thing we did find was that membership, the idea of membership, was a little bit of a struggle for businesses because they were already members of other organizations, right? They were already paying dues to the neighborhood chamber and maybe the big Seattle chamber and maybe, whatever sort of business sector they were in, whether it was restaurant or the Retailers Association or something like that was not necessarily local, but other organizations that they were paying dues for. So figuring out how to provide value for a membership has been a challenge for our organization, and we have tended to lean on programmatic program fees and engaging businesses that way. And our membership has stayed relatively low over the years, and we're actually restructuring our membership again in 2016 to work on building a broader, larger network. Not at a place where we're touching a lot of different businesses in a lot of different ways. We've had the same experience that Elissa's had as far as philanthropic dollars have been very slow to come. We have had a couple of major donors with family foundations that get it and have supported the work over the years. We do believe that there's room for that, but it's a slow education process. Our community foundation here in Seattle, the Seattle Foundation, is just now really beginning to understand that the focus on enterprise development as an economic development strategy is really, really important, and ultimately that's going to be the way toward an economy that serves more people who live here. So that's exciting, but that's taken a while to get even to having that kind of conversation. Andrew, would you show my last slide? I think it's slide number 5, maybe in your deck there. It's a little bit hard. Go to the next one. There you go, this one. So I don't expect people to be able to totally sort this out, but the basic, each of these categories here are the categories of membership, and then the bars are how things have changed over the years. You'll see membership on the far left. It's always stayed relatively low compared to some of our other sources. Program fees has been significant, has continued to grow over the years. Sponsorship is another one that has really been a big one for us. Our grants have been quite erratic, and again, that's sort of dependent on a couple of individual family foundations that like something we're doing and want to throw some money at it, but we haven't really gotten sound, operational support in that way. Donations have been very small. Events have not been a big focus for us. Again, probably because we're in an urban environment where there are many big events, and trying to compete with that would have been very difficult. Contracts is a new area for us, and that is starting to grow very rapidly, and that points to something Derek said and Elissa said about how the longer you stick around and the more credibility you show, then people start to see you as a really viable partner to actually get work done that they need to get done, and so they contract with you to help make that happen. And as you can demonstrate the need as well and inspire them to fund that. And so that I know is going to continue to grow in 2016 and beyond. We already have probably double what we had this in 2015 is already lined up for 2016. With a broader array of partners as well, including the City of Seattle, the Port of Seattle, and the Seattle Foundation, actually. So that's how things have changed for us. Derek, anything you want to throw into that?
Our experience is very similar. I would share, over the years we've gotten, a lot of state and federal grants, and those test an organization. In many ways, they have a lot of administrative requirements that you have to have an organization with good systems in place in order to do that. In addition, they tend to pay slowly, so you can incur a lot of cash expense and get reimbursed much later. So it can present some cash flow challenges. But in the end, I'm very happy that we have contracts with the state and local governments and the federal governments, because the amounts are fair for the work that's expected, and so it's a good business decision. And I feel strongly that networks like ours can produce the kind of outcomes that local, state, and federal governments want. And we can do that faster, cheaper, and better. We're better messengers. We're better at engaging the business community to get the change we want to see in the world done than government in most every case that I've studied. So I wanted to stress that. But same challenges with foundations, individual donors, the philanthropy pitch, as you guys mentioned.
One other thing I would add is that when you're first getting started, I would encourage you to think about membership as kind of the way people enter the group, and that after that you can set up a whole array of like pay-to-play options, right? So then you start to pay for, you define what people get in their membership. So for example, our members get a window cling, they get to use our logo, they get to be listed in our online and our print directory. But if they participate in any other advertising or they attend any other events, I mean, we have some free events, but we have lots that they pay for, or that people pay to sponsor, or that they pay to support in other ways. I would just encourage you to start to think about building out that slate.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great segue into the next question around that network or membership model, and I'll kick this one off. I mentioned that we had built membership into the first program fee, the Think Local program fee, and then the following year when we went around to renew membership, we found that to be a challenge because they were looking for sort of a very clear quid pro quo, and we hadn't done as good a job, I think, maybe as we could have, of really promoting and uplifting this idea of this bigger picture vision and why being a member really mattered, because we were so focused on talking about the benefits of participating in the Think Local campaign. And so we had a challenge in renewing members and had to go back to the drawing board a little bit in terms of, what's the role of businesses participating in our programs versus membership. And I wouldn't say we have cracked that nut, but I will say in our newest program, which is the Seattle Made program, we developed right out of the gate, we were very clear on sort of the bigger picture mission of that, and that it was a collaboration of local producers and manufacturers, and they have had really input all along the way, and we developed mechanisms right out of the gate for them to be able to be connecting with each other and getting benefit out of the learning that they're having from each other. Everything from, you know, hey, I'm leasing some space and I have some space to sublet, to does anybody know of a good local label maker? All of those things that have really made them feel like it's not that they have a relationship with us as an organization, it's that they are in fact part of a network. And I think that's one of the things you have to balance as you're building out your offerings, is whether or not the business feels like they're part of something bigger, or they just have a relationship with you as an organization. Because then if it's just with the organization, then it becomes a what have you done for me lately question in the business's mind, because they're always having to weigh, you know, am I getting the value out of what I'm paying for dues? So I would encourage people to think about that really early on as they're developing this, and what are the ways to connect businesses. Recognizing that businesses are super busy and they have a lot of people asking them for stuff. So that's the other piece of it, especially in a very urban environment. Maybe in a rural environment, it's not quite as that dynamic is not quite as strong, but certainly in an urban environment, you'll find that businesses are already quite tapped out. You guys want to jump in with your experience around how that network and membership model has evolved before we go into a little bit about the board?
Oh, I could say a bit. When we first started, you know, membership was critical and still is. It's, you know, 12, 13, 14% of our budget, and it's a way a business can say, I'm engaged. I'm open to ideas from you. I want to be a better business, and so that's super important. Over the years, we've decided that as we've grown in our impact, and many of the ideas we're promoting became more and more mainstream, more and more non-local businesses started to get interested. And we had a lot of locally owned businesses say, look, you could really help me access markets you know, if you would engage with this non-local business, you can help me access markets and help me be a more successful business. And so we've become more inclusive. We created a partnership program. The business partners that aren't locally owned can't use the Think Local First logo, right? It's just not right for them to use it. But we will engage constructively with non-local businesses that don't or that are interested. I'd also add that one of the other complications of getting government money often is that you can't restrict your services to only locally owned businesses when you access these funds. So, for example, our Community Energy Challenge energy services cannot be restricted to just locally owned. It just so happens that 80% of our businesses that are interested in it are locally owned or more, but we couldn't restrict to just locally owned.
Derek, do you want to go into, Elissa, do you want to add anything to the membership question?
I think that the only thing I would add is that I think a lot of our success with building membership and other parts of our organization has been really thinking about building relationships and doing that at a very human scale. And building community. And so we've added elements to all of our member mixers where we make sure people are building relationships, that they're connecting with other people. That our conference is framed that way as well. And some of that's just facilitating conversations between people in an intentional way that helps them build relationships and then find value in being part of your organization because they've met all these people through your organization. And we try to focus on that before we focus on growing their business. Certainly their businesses grow, but we try to focus on those relationships first. And if you're looking for models at how you would do that, there's some great ones out there. I'm a big fan of Peter Block's work. He's written a book called Building Community, and I'd encourage you to look into that. There's also, you can see examples of how to facilitate some of those conversations at the BALLE conference or events like Social Venture Institutes.
Thank you for adding those resources. What about the board? How has the board played a role in developing and growing the organization? Derek, do you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, sure. I'm no great student or expert in board engagement or formation or anything, but in my experience, the little reading I've done, typically the stages of board development for nonprofits are that you start with a very hands-on working volunteer board of directors, and then they, as the organization matures and you add professional staff, then you develop a lot of policy and systems for monitoring policy, and and the board does less hands-on work, and then you shift into a fundraising board. I think those are the kind of the typical maturation process. We did that in some ways. In the early days when we had virtually no funding at all, we needed our board members to show up and set up for events and help us take down for events. We needed them to promote for us, distribute publications for us, even recruit new members for us. And so they were very much a hardworking, hands-on board. We did go through the policy phase, and they help us with strategic planning. They help us through sponsoring programs on behalf of their businesses. So we've got some really good systems in place, good committee structure, things like that. The board has not gotten to the stage where there's a significant resource for fundraising yet. And I guess my advice on that is that, yes, you can invest in training board members in fundraising tactics, but it also helps to recruit board members based on their fundraising savvy to begin with, and a clear expectation that we're going to need fundraising support from you. And so I think that will help you be more successful if you need them to help fundraise, that the expectation is clear and that they have some experience to begin with. So yeah, the board is awesome. It's been wonderful, and I'm constantly still racking my brains to try to figure out how to make the experience better for them and have it make the organization more and more effective. And that's, I think, a challenge for nearly every nonprofit.
Elissa?
I would second all of Derek's comments, and I guess I would also just say, sometimes I hear from nonprofit staff people that really don't like their boards. And I think I have an awesome board. I actually have 2 awesome boards, and I love working with all of those board members. But I think part of that love and part of the way we've worked so well together over the years is that instead of thinking of them as this like kind of just nebulous group, I've really thought about how do I engage each of these individual people that cares about our mission with their skill set and their talent in helping grow this organization. And so I'd encourage you to really think about each of those people, because they can be some of your best assets, but they don't necessarily, that's not necessarily going to show up in monthly meetings. That's in work that's happening outside, and some of it might be through committees, but some of that's just one-on-one. So think about how you can engage those folks, and also just have a really positive attitude. They're volunteers, and they're giving their time for free.
That's such a great point, that how they're volunteers and giving their time for free, and the more interesting and fun you can make it for them, while still advancing the work and not putting, an additional sort of unnecessary work on the staff is such a great thing. And I think the point about really liking the board members is an important one, to the extent that you can balance the skill sets and connections and relationships that they might have that you need, you know, finding that person, but also somebody that you know that day in and day out that, you know, they're going to have your back and you're going to enjoy, you know, going through the good times and the tougher times with, I think is really, we've had a few candidates that we've considered, and when it came down to like, okay, gee, do we really want to work with them? It was like, oh, not so sure, you know, and then others were super excited about it. And what about partnerships? I'll start with this one, the role that partnerships have played in the growth of your organization. Pretty much nothing that we have done of any significance we did without a major partner. Even the Think Local campaign that we did, that was really our first big thing out of the gate. We started that in partnership with the largest Seattle Weekly magazine at the time, or weekly newspaper at the time. And without that, it would not have carried the same interest or you know, momentum if we had just come out with, you know, we have, you know, window decals and you know, and a website. We needed the oomph of somebody who was bringing some other kind of oomph to the table. And how you get those partnerships when you're first starting out, I think, you know, to the extent that you can go out and tell an inspirational story and show who's already on board is really the key. Once people get excited about something, then they become your advocates and can carry it through whatever organizational hurdles they need. Same thing with Seattle Made. We really had a great partner in the city of Seattle as we were launching that, and we engaged them deeper and deeper, and now we're a, you know, pretty tight partner on that, both funding and otherwise. And we started with them slowly. We had them on the steering committee, and as they got hooked on it, then they became a founding partner, and they introduced us to other potential founding partners, and it's a relationship that grew. And that was very strategic for us. We knew that was going to be, it was going to be important to have them on board in a significant way in order to get the other kind of support that we needed and wanted to have. The other thing I would say about partnerships is that depending on, it's really important to understand the landscape that you're operating in and who the other players are in the field, the other organizations that are working on all aspects of economy and equity and environment as it's related to the economy, because there's so many potential partnerships, and many of them may work out wonderfully, and others may be this sort of spiral of, you know, non-productive conversations, and you can find yourself sort of in a partnership limbo. So I think one of the keys is to keep things as focused as you can, while making sure that you're all along the way, you're always developing relationships, whether it's in subtle ways or deeper ways, shallow or otherwise, always making sure that people know that you and your organization are open to partnership. You want to be engaged and part of a broader community, and that you're not sort of siloed. And the more you can do that, then the more of the right things will emerge. That's been our experience. Anybody else want to add to that?
You covered
I think so too.
Same ground. Oh, Elissa, you want to go?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I thought you did a good job covering it.
I thought so as well. They're slow, and absolutely the way to go. Over the years, we've been able to multiply our impact in the community because, you know, we took great interest in other organizations and understanding their strengths, understanding where our missions and our goals overlap, and how our strengths complement one another. And so it's really fantastic nowadays when, you know, we've done 2 or 3 or 4 projects with another nonprofit or 2, and then a big USDA grant opportunity comes up, and the partners pull together under an idea, and we know how to put a great proposal together. And there's not a lot of friction in the whole thing. We trust each other. Like I said, we know each other's strengths, a lot of trust, and so it's extraordinarily rewarding that way.
Yeah. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. I know we want to cover some opportunities and challenges. Derek, I know we covered a little bit of this, but is there anything else you'd like to add about what are the key sort of objectives that this network model can address? You know, as opposed to a model that's more of we're an entity that does, you know, services individual businesses. This is a different concept about a network model.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, annually we survey our members and the businesses we serve, and they feel like they're part of something bigger. And, you know, feeling is important, and not just the actions and the, you know, outcomes you can quantify, but the feeling, the motivation, you know, and, you know, after doing this for 14 years and seeing a lot of change happen, people start to see themselves as, yes, I'm a people, planet, profit business, and I'm leading on these issues with hundreds of other businesses, and this is the new norm. And so I guess I would just say that.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Elissa?
I think it accelerates the change. Simply because of what Derek was just saying, that when you're working with a group of businesses and you're inspiring them and they're each individually taking action, at some point you start to create a new norm for behavior in your business community. And that can have really rapid and profound effects. So it's catalytic. And it also can engage the community in supporting local businesses and in feeling like they can actually make a difference in what the economy looks like in their region. It gives people a sense of hope rather than a sense of helplessness.
Yes, absolutely. We've also found that because we have been building this network of engaged businesses, that we become a very attractive partner to others in the community that are trying to get certain things done, whether it's our public utilities or the city or whomever. And so it brings out potential that we wouldn't have if we were just working with these businesses one-on-one.
It also gives you power in being and representing their collective voice. So there's, rather than just being a nonprofit, we represent the voice of 850 businesses. And while we're not doing that for each of them individually, that gives us a lot of political credibility.
Yes, totally agree. What about, you know, as you've looked back, what have been some of the biggest budgetary sort of obstacles or considerations? I know we've covered some of the challenges around certain categories of revenue, but are there any other ideas or things that people should be thinking about as they're considering whether to start something like this and how to grow it? And I guess my name's on here, so I'll go ahead and start. One thing I would say is that as Elissa and Derek and I have been witness to many other similar local first type business alliances around the country, and so we've seen a lot of them be successful. We've seen a lot of them have challenges, and I would say that the ones that have been able to be successful, the first thing is they're able to stick around, and I really think that longevity is what allows that credibility to build and those partnerships to come in, and the stabilization of the revenue and the variation in the revenue. And what allows it to be able to stick around in a lot of cases has been you've got, you know, a few people, one or two or three, that are really committed, and they're not in a situation where they're looking at this as, this is my job with a steady paycheck. I'm going to do this because I'm going to have a job with a steady paycheck. They frankly have been able to do this work, not always knowing exactly what the revenue situation is going to be. The first year or two, sometimes three, is unpredictable, and so they've been in a situation personally where they're able to do that. Either they have a partner who is also working, or they don't have high financial commitments. So it is something to consider if it's something that you're really interested in. That those first few years are not always you know, the money's not always there to pay you what you want to be paid. But if you're able to get through those first few years, then you can really have something that you can be proud of.
Yeah, I would add to that one of the things we've been thinking about over the years and working on and making, fortunately, a steady progress on is, you know, in the early to mid years of the organization, we attracted a lot of staff members who believed in the mission so much, and they made a lot of personal sacrifice, just like the founders. Well, that's the behavior we modeled, you know, and I think it was necessary to get the organization started, but how to get enough revenue in to offer competitive compensation for our staff who are producing such great outcomes. That's one of the biggest challenges we face. And like I said, I'm proud to say we've made steady progress on that, but it hasn't been easy.
Well, I mean, that's true, right? Because we're also nonprofits that are working with for-profits that are values-aligned businesses oftentimes. And so when we've lost staff, it's often to our members who are able to significantly compensate or significantly increase their compensation. That's not always the case, but it's been true. That also means, though, that we've been able to hire a lot of really talented young people who were just out of college and who worked for us for 2, 3, 4 years and then launched into the next phase of their life.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to add to what you said, Derek, about you get to the point in the organization, you know, the founders are modeling this behavior of, well, it's okay if I don't get paid, if I got paid last month or anything at all this month or whatever. So modeling this behavior that ultimately is not healthy for an organization in the long run. And so at some point, the organization, the founders and leaders of the organization or the board needs to say, okay, when are we going to start working to operate like a healthy nonprofit organization? And what does that look like? How are we going to work differently and look at our opportunities differently and raise money for them differently than we have in the past? And that takes a very conscious choice to move into that. And I would say, I think that the organizations that we've probably witnessed fail, many of them never made that transition. And so you end up with people who they burn out essentially, and then because they go away, the organization goes away.
Yeah.
So if you can recognize that that's a path, you know, you do that sort of sacrifice thing up front, and then at some point you say, okay, now we need to operate differently, and this is how we're going to be a stable organization. Being really conscious about that, which may mean making some changes that are uncomfortable, or saying no to things that normally you would want to say yes to.
Yeah.
Okay, our time is almost up. I've got one more question, and that is, what do you wish you knew when you were at the beginning of this journey? Do you have any sort of, you know, final thoughts or tips for someone who's thinking about pursuing this path? Elissa?
That is a great question. I think, you know, this has been such an enjoyable journey. It's been very challenging, but also very enjoyable. And what I wish that I would have remembered in the beginning was that I was surrounded by this group of passionate entrepreneurs, and that it was okay to ask them for help, especially as I was launching something, because most of those people have launched something and they've been through those hard times. And so that's not something I did as much in the beginning that I started to do later. And I would really encourage you to think about how you can find 1 or 2 entrepreneurs that you work with who can be kind of your mentors or friends or the people that you can safely bounce ideas off of as you're launching these kinds of campaigns and strategize together.
Good one.
How about you, Derek?
Well, I focused on the second part of the question, 3 tips for someone starting down this road. And the 3 that popped to mind right away, number 1, really know your community, do your market research, you know your marketplace, super important. Secondly, you know, be prepared to volunteer a lot and think through what really can you give to make the success. As Elissa said, it's really rewarding and also very hard, just like a small business. And then finally, surround yourself with people that other people want to be around, right? Business owners that that are magnetic, you know, and successful. And yeah, bring those people around you and you'll have a much better chance of being successful.
Those are all so great. I would agree with all three of those, and also what Elissa said. One thing that I would add is, because people who tend to start these tend to be generalists, it's easy for us to take on a lot of those little tasks that really somebody else could do. And if you are the kind of person that is has some vision and has the ability to build relationships and develop ideas and develop programs, as soon as it's at all possible, that's the work you should be doing. And find other people, whether it's you know, young people who have nothing to lose and they want to volunteer for something that they're inspired by, or other business owners who want to jump in, whoever it is, find other people to do that day-to-day work so that you can be out building the vision and the organization, because the sooner you do that, the sooner you'll be on a path to sustainability for the work that you want to do.
Thanks.
All right, well, thanks you guys so much for sharing all of your insight and everything, and thanks to BALLE for organizing this webinar. We hope to see many more successful Local First Alliances out there over the next few years. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks and good luck.
Hi, thank you so much, Christine, and many thanks to all three of you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. That was a wonderful conversation. That will definitely be helpful to those looking to catalyze localist action in their places. For more information on this and other local economy ecosystem models, be sure to visit the BALLE 101 Toolkit at the BALLE website, www.balocalist.org. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.